When I look at the pictures of the things with the stylish hair and the clothes and things like that, it makes me think it was well before I was born. And since I was born in 1935 and my brother was 1933, this was well before that. This could have been a 1920 type dress and hair and styles and things like that. So it was way before us. And I could recognize the style probably of my mother, Eva, and it also looks like what Ethel used to look like with the hairstyles. And so this could have been when she was either teenager or early 20s, maybe. And because I see part of family, I could see Ben Finkelstein, and that I know from as an old man in New Jersey in business, and that's a whole different section of the family, which I didn't follow through on. Mm-hmm. But basically that's it, and I see what looks like Ethel, but I can't be sure. But definitely Eva. There was some pictures that do resemble her. Of course, I remember at an older age. So.
Do you remember? Do you know the story where they came from?
Kiev, Russia. A lot of torment, a lot of problems trying to get out of there, and came through, I guess, Ellis Island. And when I don't know if they knew each other before. My parents knew each other before or not, but they could have, and they could have come by boat through Ellis Island, and whether or not they were married at that time, I don't remember. But they ended up in lower Manhattan. My father getting a job. He told me later as a shoe maker. He worked in a factory that made shoes in the Lower East Side. And I recall, of course, when I was little, when we used to go on a regular basis to the Lower East Side to go to the Jewish theater, which I couldn't really understand, but they had a good kick out of it. And my parents, I remember, would, if they didn't want kids to hear anything or understand anything, would speak in Russian. Yiddish was a common language to use, but that was also when they didn't want us to understand. We picked it up in pieces. And that was it. I was very influenced at that time. I think, yeah, they were apparently married in the Lower East Side and trying to scrape by because it was coming out of depression. And then they ended up in Brooklyn, I think, I can't say the reason for it, but I know my father and my uncle Jack Rubin, became partners, they became buddies, and started a grocery business in Brooklyn. And so that's where I was born. And but I remember when I was little how the reason for a grocery business was because at least you would have food if the depression continued. That was part of the philosophy. And I remember when we were little, we actually had to deliver the groceries to various customers. And later on, I remember when the threat of an A&P store, which was a giant store like the equivalent of Walmart today, started. My father was very confident because an A&P store couldn't treat the customers the way he could because it was personal contact, and he would accept credit by making a handwritten notebook and note how much the customer would owe them. You know, and I think that was a big deal because it was also coming out of depression.
Right.
And I remember World War II. World War II was a big deal because rationing. And we used to buy what he used to buy. Yeah, the first store I remember was on Van Siclen Avenue in Brooklyn, which was underneath elevated train. And I would remember going to elementary school, kindergarten and things like that, but being awakened by the trains, because it was right out of a window. But the thing about Brooklyn is, or any of those neighborhoods, was that you had everything there. We lived above the grocery store. And I recall my father having to go into the basement where there was coal delivered. So during the winters, my father would have to start up the boiler to heat the place and heat everything, to heat hot water. And I remember trying not to get out of bed because it was warm in bed, and to kind of get out of bed was cold. And I would remember getting dressed right next to the radiator, which was a hot water system, hot water steam. And during the World War II was my childhood. And I remember my Aunt Rose, which was Eva's sister, would live with us because her husband, Nat, I don't know if she was married yet or going with him or something like that, was in the Army and he was overseas. And so she came to us to live in the meantime. And so she did a lot of our upbringing. But she was like an older sister rather than a aunt. Because my mother would be working downstairs with my father in the grocery store. And I remember at, I think it was 9, 10, 11, I don't remember, 1945. So I was 9 years old. Coming home from elementary school, the public school, and being met within a block of the store, ready to go into the house. And I think this was the end of the spring. And one of the customers from the grocery store comes and sees me as I'm walking home and says, "I'm very sorry to hear about your mother." And I didn't know what she was talking about. And I couldn't understand what she was talking about. I do remember seeing my mother in the hospital, and she eventually succumbed to Hodgkin's disease, which was something they couldn't treat at that time. Now they can treat it, they can cure it. But at that time it was a cancer of the lymphatic system, and I didn't know why. I do remember going to the hospital bed and with the family on occasions, and having the fumes of the hospital made me nauseous. But that was it. My brother, my older brother, Murray, with the business of the grocery store occupying the parents, would be like the one that took care of me. He was responsible. And he was told by my mother and father that you will take care of Marvin. And remember, he doesn't eat. Okay, so you gotta make sure he eats. He's too skinny. And my brother really didn't like that. Okay, didn't like that job. He wanted to be independent of me, and he didn't like the fact that he would hold the money if we went to the movie. He would hold the snack if we, for the time that we're away, in between, I guess, movies. Usually there's double features. And he would threaten me, "I'm not giving it to you because, you didn't do this," or whatever. He would threaten me with withholding. Or, "We're going to get to the movie theater, but I'm not paying your way." that sort of stuff.
Right.
And he tried to evoke either me crying or me, whatever it was. It was interesting because I was always puny, and he was bigger. And later on, we would get into fights, and he would always be able to manhandle me, or at least threaten. And it was later on that this was actually in junior high school or high school, that I became stronger and found out how to get back in him.
And how was that?
We'd kick him in the shins. But these used to turn into quite big fights. They were, we'd break windows and we'd break beds and
Do you know any of the stories of them coming to this country, of your parents?
not in detail. I remember being told, but I was too young to really absorb them. I do remember stories on the East Side, which surviving and getting a job and trying to overcome the competition of a job. It was difficult to work, and I think that carried with me. It's part of my personality to do things my father did.
You remember, you were talking about coming to the country?
Yeah, he came to this country, and I remember stories about the name and Ellis Island. My father had the impression that all over the world everybody's Jewish. And so when my brother was born and I was born, since everybody's Jewish, it didn't matter what race they were, he used our Jewish names, for the birth certificates. And since then we got fouled up because of it. So there's confusion with my brother, who was either Morris or Murray. I'm not sure. And Maish, of course, is his Jewish name. And I've got a mayor on my birth certificate. Mm-hmm. And because the person behind the desk should have understood that Meir Yankel is my name, of course. That's my Jewish name. So it's Marvin J. or Mayor J. on the birth certificate. And right now I've got both identities in my wallet.
The story of Eva dying.
Yes.
So you don't remember any of that?
I do remember going to the hospital, and I remember the reaction.
Okay.
And I remember once it happened, we moved. We moved and to Saratoga Avenue in Brooklyn, which was a house occupied by my father's sisters. And this could have been to take care of the boys, to take care of the kids. I'm trying to get details on it. I'm trying to recall. But I remember right across the street in Saratoga Avenue was a shul. And that's where we had to say Kaddish. And every day we went to say Kaddish for a year. Every day. And we were responsible for that. And but the timing of that is tough. I don't recall.
Okay. Do you know what year she died?
It should have been 45.
So you were 9 years old.
Yeah. And
Okay.
my brother, I guess, was 11. And okay, we moved to Saratoga, and this is very strange. Ethel was always a friend of Eva. And I think we used to visit or something like that. One of the things that my father did was immediately, that summer, I guess it was 1945, I guess the spring is when I knew about this, what happened. And that summer, he sent us to camp. And my brother remembers more vividly what emotionally that meant. But when we came home from camp, which could have been September or late August or something like that, we noticed that Ethel was living with us. And we're talking to Ethel at one time, and also Sandra. Sandra is Ethel's daughter. And we find out that Ethel tells us that they were married. And my brother and I resented that. You know, why didn't he ask us? Why didn't they talk about it? And did he really need to go with some other woman when obviously he's got his own family? And bring this other daughter in who was very difficult to get along with. She was not that good a personality. And so I always resented Ethel and Sandra, and they treated them like separate people, separate, strangers.
Right.
But Ethel was actually very good because she treated us, like another mother, and would do everything that had to be done to take care of us and take care of the food and things like that. But also the grocery business continued. My father now, I think, sold the store on Van Sicklen Avenue, and he got another store, Amboy Street. Amboy Street was in a bad neighborhood. A lot of blacks and a lot of thievery. And Ethel and my father would be at Amboy Street, and they would work like 18 hours a day. It was ridiculous. But
she worked with him?
Yeah. And I think there was one car, and I'm trying to remember what it was. But I remember the car. The car was the style, of course, of the 40s or 30s or whatever it was, and because I remember the classic image of it. Also, the type of upbringing we had, and the way things were. When I see certain movies, like the let's see, the one with Barbara Streisand, where she talks to her father, who's actually dead, and she's I forget the name of it. Yentl. Okay, the boat trip seems like it's familiar to me. Okay, her being on a boat, and the way my father would describe it, and of course Eva, and later Ethel, would be like I would imagine it was with Yentl.
Okay.
And the description of Fiddler on the Roof would be description of something that my father probably told us.
Ethel told me once a story about how they walked out of Russia in a way that was very similar to...
Yeah. Yeah, all this type of thing was, and the pogroms. My father would talk about the pogroms, where anybody of authority would just raid the Jewish settlements, and that they were brought up just the way it was. When everything was arranged. In fact, I think my father's going with Ethel was arranged by my mother. She actually told him, "This is what you're going to do." And Ethel, I guess, was her best friend, and and Ethel had needs, and with a daughter, and my father had needs with the two boys, young kids.
Ethel had told me stories. I don't know if you remember these stories about how she used to sneak around and follow you to make sure you were okay.
Oh, no, I don't know.
She'd sneak and follow you to bus stops, and she would
Really?
follow you.
Yeah.
You don't remember any of that?
No. It was probably an age where I was in junior high school or elementary school. Probably junior high school. And I don't know if I was, or this could have been actually Boy Scout type thing. You know, the reason for that size of pack meant I was spending an overnight type situation somewhere. But that was it. It shows me as a very puny kid. You know, that's the way I was brought up.
At least compared to the bag.
Yes, well, the bag had a lot of stuff in it.
Now, you used to tell stories. I don't know if this is the right time to tell the stories about you growing up. You remember being on the steps with the friends. And
Yes, that's Union Street. Union Street is a classic street, Jewish neighborhood, where everybody was on the street. The street was the world. And I remember 18 boys. And of course, there were the girls that were friends to Sandra, my half-sister. And it ends up that the 18 boys only went with people in the neighborhood. So you had Sandra eventually marrying David Walder, who was around the corner.
another guy from the neighborhood.
Everyone's neighborhood. And Marcia marrying Butch Lamberg, which was right across the street.
Who was Marcia?
Marcia is Sandra's friend, best friend. And Roy Ditton marrying somebody in another neighborhood in Brooklyn who you can only go on dates with because somebody has a car. So somebody had the ability to borrow a parent's car and be able to go on a date with somebody out of this particular confinement to another confinement.
So do you remember anything else about the streets of Brooklyn growing up? I mean, when I picture it, I
There's
picture...
plenty.
You know,
This is West Side Story. This is typical East Side movie things. And I can recall style of buildings, style of dress, the style of the cars. The other thing is, I when I took a trip into Manhattan once, they have a museum a tenement museum, and they actually restored the tenement to look like it did on the original East Side. And it's almost as you go in there, you get the flavor of it. When I go into the house in Union Street, it looked like that, with the old type of walls, textured walls. You wouldn't use paint at that time, or maybe they paint over the texture.
like a spackling.
Yeah, but it was like a plastic sheets, and the same thing with the ceilings. And
Were there a lot of, were there fights? Was it a tough neighborhood to be in?
it was actually it's all Jewish neighborhood. It was, anybody that wasn't Jewish wouldn't be in that neighborhood.
Okay.
But it's something where you knew everybody, and you knew the kids, of course, and you knew the parents. The parents would invite you in, and you know what everybody was doing, and it was generations. And of course, during the Halloween season, we would be mischievous, and you would turn over garbage pails and things like that. You do bad stuff. And then there was games. There was setups of games which I think were established and were well known and went from neighborhood to neighborhood. It was obvious. It was Ringalivio. It was Johnny and the Pony. It was using, who could hit two sewers with a broomstick and a softball, and who could eventually pee how far, from the curb. And there were certain rules. You had to stand on the curb, your toes would be aligned with the curb, and who could pee furthest. And there were baseball games on the street where you would choose, the outfield would be limited to a 2.5 length, and the bases were automobile tires, which car and which things like that, and it'd be running if you hit it and things like that. And I remember certain people always had the vision of becoming major league ball players when they grew up. So they'd be pitching all the time against one of the brick walls from one side of the street to the other. And I remember some of them, let's see, I'm trying to remember the names. But Shankman used to be the pitcher. He had dreams of having a very fast ball and a curve and things like that. And he would be for hours pitching from one side of the street to the other against the brick wall. And the brick wall was necessary so it bounced off of that to come back to him. So you have the next pitch.
Yeah. So you pretty much didn't see Max very much growing up? He was always working?
He was always working. And we'd see, of course, I think on Sundays. And on the weekends there were trips made. And well, during the week, or maybe on the weekend too, my brother would be in charge. He would be the one to take me to visit other relatives, either on Long Island or in the Bronx or something like that. And everything was by subway. And it used to be a nickel to get on the subway. And he would hold the money. And there was probably something to eat on the way. But these were day events. You know, you go out to see the relatives, and or later on when we had the car, we would drive out there. And I remember the summers we'd go to Coney Island. Coney Island was a big deal because it used to be very hot in the city, and so the only place to get some breezes, you would go to Coney Island. Coney Island has established the rides and the stores and it was a place to go and filled with memories.
Do you remember anything else about Eva?
I remember she was very strict, and I remember that it was a big deal on Friday nights. She would prepare for the Sabbath dinner. It was always a chicken, and I remember there were pickles, which you got out of a barrel, and there was regular meals set up. It was a routine. It was something consistent. And later on, I remember that your mother would try and copy that because she was very traditional also. And but it was a special thing, Sabbath, lighting candles, things like that. I remember most of my clothing was hand-me-downs from my brother, because one size fits all. Okay. And if I was to get anything on my own, it was always a bigger size. Something was too big, so because I'd grow into it.